A quiet promise was meant to secure her future. Yet the moment she stepped into that grand house, an unexpected gaze shattered every certainty she thought she possessed. Bound by duty, she accepted a union that could save everything she loved, never imagining the one heart capable of undoing her resolve belonged to someone she was forbidden to desire. Secrets stir beneath polished manners, loyalty trembles on dangerous ground, and a single choice threatens to ignite a scandal that could ruin them all. Before we begin, tell me, from where in the world are you listening? And one more question. What do you love most about historical romances? The passion, the mystery, or the forbidden longing? In the misty hills of the Cotswolds, where honey-coloured stone cottages huddled against the relentless English wind, Eleanor Hargrove stood at the edge of her family's crumbling estate. It was the year 1812, and the weight of Regency England's unyielding expectations pressed upon her like the damp fog rolling in from the valleys. At 20 years of age, with chestnut curls pinned beneath a simple muslin bonnet and a gown of faded lavender bombazine that spoke of better days, long past, Eleanor gazed at the distant spire of the village church. Her heart, once light as the larks that wheeled overhead, now beat with a quiet desperation. Her father, Mr. Reginald Hargrove, a once prosperous landowner brought low by poor harvests and unwise investments, had gathered the family in the drawing-room that very morning. The fire crackled feebly in the grate, casting shadows on the threadbare carpets. "Eleanor, my dear," he had said, his voice trembling as he clutched a sealed letter, "this is our salvation. Lord Edward Blackwood has proposed marriage. His estate adjoins ours, and his fortune will restore us all." Eleanor's mother, frail and weeping into her lace handkerchief, had nodded fervently. Her younger sister, little Clara, only 15, had clutched Eleanor's hand, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. But Eleanor had felt the world tilt. Lord Edward Blackwood was a man of 30, titled and wealthy, master of Blackwood Manor, a sprawling pile of ancient oaks and manicured lawns that overlooked the wool-rich meadows. Whispers in the village painted him as stern, dutiful, a widower whose first wife had perished in childbirth 2 years prior, leaving him childless and remote. He sought a bride to secure his lineage, not for love's tender flame. Yet what choice did she have? The Hargrove lands were mortgaged to the hilt, servants dismissed, and creditors circled like crows. Refusal meant ruin. The auction block for their home, the workhouse for her family. I accept, Eleanor had whispered, her voice barely audible over the ticking clock. The words had sealed her fate, a pact born of necessity, not desire. As the afternoon sun dipped low, painting the hills in golden hues, Eleanor wandered the overgrown garden, her kid gloves brushing against wilted roses. The air smelled of earth and impending rain, a scent that mirrored the storm brewing in her soul. Marriage to a stranger, a lord no less, meant leaving behind the simple joys of village life, the harvest fairs, the secret glens where she read poetry by the brook, the laughter shared with childhood friends. It meant stepping into a world of rigid etiquette, where every glance was scrutinized, every word weighed like gold. But deeper still lurked a fear she dared not name. In the shadowed corners of her mind, Eleanor wondered if her heart could endure a union devoid of warmth. Would Lord Edward's eyes ever soften for her? Or would she forever be the dutiful shadow at his side, bearing heirs while her spirit withered? A rustle in the hedgerow startled her. From the underbrush emerged a figure on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, his greatcoat dusted with the road's grime. He dismounted with effortless grace, revealing a face handsome in its rugged lines, dark hair tousled by the wind, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. It was no stranger, but Henry Blackwood, the Lord's younger brother, returned unexpectedly from his travels abroad. "Miss Hargrove," he said, his voice warm and unexpectedly familiar, tipping his hat with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I heard the news on the road from London. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." Eleanor's cheeks flushed beneath her bonnet. She had met Henry once, years ago, at a local assembly. He was 23 then, full of mischief and tales of the wider world, Oxford, the continent, adventures that made her pulse quicken. Now he seemed even more alive, a contrast to the sombre portrait of his brother that hung in the manor hall. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, curtsying slightly, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "Your brother is most generous." Henry's gaze lingered a moment too long, searching her face as if reading the unspoken turmoil there. "Generous, yes, but marriage is a grave undertaking, Miss Hargrove. I trust it brings you joy as well as security." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Joy, a luxury she had not dared to hope for. As Henry remounted and rode toward the manor, Eleanor watched him go, a strange ache blooming in her heart. What secrets did the Blackwood brothers share? And why did the sight of this one stir something forbidden within her? A spark that threatened to ignite the careful cage she had just agreed to enter. Little did she know. This encounter was but the first thread in a tapestry of passion, betrayal, and unbreakable bonds that would unravel everything she thought she understood about love and duty. If this tale of forbidden longing has captured your heart from the start, hit that subscribe button now to join our journey through Regency romances, and drop a comment below telling me your city and country. Let's see where this story takes us together. The days following Eleanor's reluctant acceptance blurred into a haze of preparations and whispers. Blackwood Manor loomed larger in her thoughts, a grand edifice of weathered stone perched on the Cotswolds' rolling hills, its chimneys puffing smoke like watchful sentinels. The Hargrove estate, Willowbrook Cottage, felt smaller by the hour, its thatched roof sagging under recent rains, the once vibrant herb garden overrun with weeds. Eleanor moved through her routines with mechanical grace, her muslin morning gown whispering against the flagstone floors as she helped her mother mend linens in the cramped parlour. Mrs. Hargrove, Beatrice, sat by the window, her silver-streaked hair tucked under a lace cap, needle flashing in the pale light. At 45, she carried the lines of worry etched deep, her hands calloused from years of pinching pennies. "You'll want for nothing at the manor, my dear," she said softly, though her eyes betrayed doubt. "Lord Edward is known for his fairness. And think of Clara. Your sacrifice ensures her a proper season in Bath some day." Eleanor nodded, forcing a smile as she threaded a needle. Clara bounced in from the kitchen, her pinafore dusted with flour from attempting scones. At 15, with freckles across her nose and braids flying, she embodied the innocence Eleanor envied. "Will there be a grand wedding, Ellie, with silk gowns and a feast?" Clara's eyes sparkled, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Perhaps," Eleanor replied, her voice light. But inside, turmoil churned. The village buzzed with the news, gossip carried on the wind from the blacksmith's forge to the parson's tea. Old Mrs. Finch, the seamstress, had arrived that morning with bolts of fabric, soft cambric for day dresses, a length of silk for the ceremony. "His lordship insists on the best," she'd clucked, measuring Eleanor's waist with a tape that felt like a noose. "Though some say he's as cold as the January frost." Eleanor's father spent his afternoons in the study, poring over ledgers with a fervour born of desperation. Reginald Hargrove, 52 and stooped from rheumatism, had once ridden to hounds with the local gentry. Now, his waistcoat strained over a softening middle and his spectacles perched on a nose reddened by cheap port. "The betrothal papers arrive tomorrow," he announced at supper that evening, The family gathered around a table set with mutton and wilted greens. Edward's solicitor is prompt. This alliance mends everything. Our debts cleared, the estate secured. Supper passed in strained conversation. The clock on the mantel ticked relentlessly, marking time Eleanor wished she could halt. After as twilight draped the hills in indigo, she slipped out to the orchard. Apple trees, gnarled and heavy with unripe fruit, offered solitude. She leaned against one, inhaling the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. The Cotswolds' beauty mocked her, those endless green folds, dotted with sheep like scattered clouds, where she'd once dreamed of love as boundless as the sky. A distant clatter of hooves pulled her from reverie. Riders approached Willowbrook, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. Her father emerged from the house, gesturing her inside. "Visitors," he murmured, "from the manor." In the drawing room, lit by sputtering candles, stood Lord Edward Blackwood himself, tall and imposing at 30, with a face chiseled like the manor's gargoyles, high cheekbones, a firm jaw shadowed by evening stubble. His dark hair was neatly queued, and he wore a tailored coat of superfine wool, breeches tucked into polished hessians. Beside him, Henry lingered by the door, his posture more relaxed, greatcoat slung over one arm. The brothers shared the same piercing blue eyes, but where Edward's held steady appraisal, Henry's flickered with curiosity. "Miss Hargrove," Edward said, bowing with precise formality. His voice was deep, measured, like the toll of a church bell. "I trust I do not intrude. I wish to pay my respects in person and discuss the arrangements." Eleanor's curtsy felt awkward, her heart pounding. "You honor us, my lord." She glanced at Henry, who offered a subtle nod, his smile fleeting but warm. They settled into chairs, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and pipe tobacco from her father's last smoke. Edward spoke of practicalities, the wedding in 3 months' time at the village church, a modest breakfast afterward, her settling at the manor post ceremony. "I value order," he explained, his gaze direct. "Blackwood has been my charge since my father's passing. This marriage strengthens both our houses." Her mother poured tea with trembling hands, praising the manor's gardens. Clara peeked from the stairs, wide-eyed. But Eleanor sensed the undercurrent, a tension in Edward's clipped words, as if duty were his only companion. Henry interjected rarely, his comments light, a jest about the road's mud, a question on the harvest, yet his eyes met Eleanor's more than once, holding just long enough to stir that unwelcome flutter. As the brothers rose to leave, Edward extended a hand. "You will find contentment, Miss Hargrove. I require little beyond companionship and heirs." His touch was cool, formal. Outside, under the stars pricking the velvet sky, Henry paused by his horse. "The night air is crisp," he said to Eleanor, who had followed to see them off. "It clears the mind for difficult paths." She searched his face, illuminated by lantern light. "And what path do you tread, Mr. Blackwood? You seem unbound by such weights." He chuckled softly, mounting up. "Unbound, perhaps. But family ties pull tight, Miss Hargrove. Watch your step on this road. It's steeper than it appears." With that, they rode into the darkness, leaving Eleanor chilled. Back in her chamber, she unpinned her hair, brushing it before a cracked mirror. The looking-glass reflected a woman on the brink, poised yet fracturing. What had Henry's words meant? A warning, or something more intimate? That night, as rain pattered against the panes, a knock echoed at the cottage door. A messenger from the manor, soaked and urgent, thrust a sealed note into her father's hands. "From his lordship," the boy gasped. "Urgent matters at Blackwood. Preparations must hasten." Eleanor watched from the hall as her father broke the seal, his face paling. What new shadow had fallen? The rain had ceased by dawn, leaving the Cotswolds' air sharp and laced with the scent of wet stone. Eleanor rose early, her limbs heavy from a night of fitful dreams, and dressed in a simple round gown of sprigged cotton, its high neckline modest against the chill. She pinned her hair in a loose chignon, a few curls escaping to frame her face, and descended to the breakfast parlour, where the family gathered in uneasy silence. Her father sat at the head of the table, the urgent note from the previous night crumpled beside his untouched plate of cold toast and weak tea. Reginald's eyes, rimmed with fatigue, met hers briefly before darting away. Mrs. Hargrove buttered a slice with mechanical precision, while Clara fidgeted with her napkin, stealing glances at the adults. "What did the message say, Father?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady as she poured herself a cup. The porcelain clinked softly against the saucer, echoing the tension. Reginald cleared his throat, unfolding the paper with reluctance. "It's from Lord Edward. There's a complication at Blackwood Manor. A distant cousin has arrived unannounced, stirring old claims on the estate. He demands a formal betrothal ceremony within the fortnight to solidify the alliance. No delays." Eleanor's spoon paused midway to her mouth. A fortnight? The wedding had been months away, a distant shadow. Now it loomed like thunderclouds over the hills. So soon? But the preparations. The banns must be read. "Edward's influence will see to that," her father replied, though his tone wavered. "The parson owes him favours. This cousin, some scheming relative from the north, threatens to contest the inheritance unless the line is secured swiftly. Your marriage is the key, Eleanor. It binds our lands to his irrevocably." Mrs. Hargrove reached for her daughter's hand, her fingers cool and trembling. "It's a blessing in disguise, dear. You'll be mistress of the manor before the leaves turn. Think of the stability." But Eleanor felt no blessing, only a tightening vice. The normal rhythm of her days, strolls through the village, quiet evenings with a book by the fire, shattered in an instant. This was the rupture, the call to a life she hadn't chosen. She imagined the manor's vast halls, echoing with footsteps not her own, and Edward's unyielding gaze appraising her like a ledger entry. Clara's voice piped up, breaking the hush. "Will I get to visit often, Ellie? And wear one of your fine gowns?" Eleanor forced a smile for her sister's sake. "Of course, Poppet. We'll have tea in the gardens." Yet inside, doubt gnawed. What allies did she have in this? Her family, bound by desperation. Perhaps the village friends, like young Miss Lydia Thorne, who had shared secrets under the old oak. But mentors, none save the stern etiquette of society itself. As the morning wore on, a carriage rumbled up the drive, its wheels churning mud from the night's downpour. Eleanor peered from the window, heart quickening. It bore the Blackwood crest, a raven on a field of green. Outstepped not Edward, but Henry, his boots splashing through puddles as he approached the door. He was shown into the parlour, shaking rain from his curly-brimmed beaver hat. At 25, Henry cut a striking figure in his riding coat of olive drab, waistcoat embroidered with subtle silver thread, and buckskin breeches that spoke of frequent jaunts across the countryside. His face, tanned from travels, held a warmth absent in his brother's portraits. "Miss Hargrove," he greeted, bowing with genuine courtesy. His eyes, that stormy blue, lingered on her with unspoken concern. "I've come on Edward's behalf. The matter is pressing." Reginald rose, gesturing to a chair. "Mr. Blackwood, join us. Tea?" Henry declined with a polite shake of his head. "Thank you, no. Time is short. My brother sends his regrets. He's occupied with this infernal cousin, but he insists on your presence at the manor this afternoon for the betrothal signing. A private affair to avoid gossip." Eleanor's pulse raced. "A signing? Already? This afternoon? I must prepare." "You need only yourself," Henry said softly, his gaze steady. "Edward values efficiency. But know this, the cousin's claims are baseless, whispers of old grudges. Your union silences them." She hesitated, the weight of refusal crashing down. To balk now meant social ruin, her family disgraced, creditors descending, Clara's future shattered. Whispers would spread through the village like wildfire, from the alehouse to the assembly rooms, branding the Hargroves as fickle ingrates. No other suitor would touch them. They'd be pariahs in the tight-knit gentry, yet stepping forward meant entering Edward's world on his terms. The rigid protocols of a noble household, where a bride's every move was watched, her voice tempered by decorum. Servants' eyes everywhere, the pressure to produce an heir, the isolation from her simple joys. And Henry, his presence complicated it all, stirring questions she dared not voice. "I see no choice," she said finally, her voice firm despite the tremor. "I will come." Henry nodded, a flicker of something, admiration, pity, crossing his features. "Brave words, Miss Hargrove. The manor awaits." As he departed, promising to return for her at noon, Eleanor retreated to her chamber. She selected a gown of pale blue merino wool, its Spencer jacket trimmed with lace, and donned her best straw bonnet adorned with silk ribbons. In the mirror, she saw a woman transformed, not by choice but by necessity. The first obstacle loomed, navigating Edward's domain, where alliances formed and fractured in parlours and salons. By midday, Henry's carriage arrived, its lacquered panels gleaming. He assisted her inside, his gloved hand warm against hers, a brief touch that sent an unwelcome spark through her. The drive wound through sheep-dotted fields, the Cotswolds' undulating landscape a blur of green and grey. Blackwood Manor rose before them, its ivy-clad facade imposing under the scudding clouds. Liveried footmen bowed as they entered the great hall, where tapestries of hunting scenes hung heavy with dust. Edward awaited in the library, a room of oak panelling and leather-bound tomes, fire roaring in the grate. He stood by the desk, documents arrayed like battle plans. At 30, his frame was athletic yet restrained, his cravat starched to perfection, coat cut by a London tailor. "Miss Hargrove," he intoned, extending a hand. "Your punctuality pleases me." The signing was swift. Vows of alliance recited before a notary, her signature inked with a quill that scratched like fate. Edward's cousin lurked in the shadows, a wiry man named Percival Blackwood, his sneer barely concealed, eyes darting like a ferret's. As the notary departed, Edward turned to her. "This secures us both. You will reside here from tomorrow to accustom yourself." Eleanor's breath caught. Tomorrow. The status quo shattered utterly, uprooted from Willowbrook, thrust into this labyrinth of expectations. Allies emerged in glimpses, Henry's quiet support, perhaps the housekeeper's knowing nod. Antagonists sharpened, Percival's malice, society's unyielding gaze. But as Edward excused himself to deal with estate matters, Henry approached. "A bold step," he murmured, "not without cost." She met his eyes, the air between them charged. "What choice remains? Duty calls." He smiled faintly. "Duty or destiny? The line blurs, Miss Hargrove." Outside, thunder rumbled anew. What storm had she invited by signing her name? And why did Henry's words echo like a promise or a peril? The carriage jolted over the rutted lane back to Willowbrook Cottage, the Cotswolds hills folding around them like watchful guardians. Eleanor sat rigidly opposite Henry, her gloved hands clasped in her lap, the ink of her signature still fresh in her mind. The betrothal papers burned in her reticule, a weight heavier than the gold seal upon them. Blackwood Manor receded behind, its towers piercing the gathering clouds, but the echo of thunder lingered, mirroring the unrest in her chest. Henry broke the silence first, his voice low against the creak of wheels. "You handled that with grace, Miss Hargrove. Not many would sign away their world so steadily." She turned to the window, watching rain-slicked sheep huddle under ancient oaks. Grace, born of necessity, Mr. Blackwood. Tomorrow I leave everything behind, my home, my life. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes catching the dim light filtering through the glass. The manor is vast, but not without its charms. Edward expects you to learn its rhythms quickly. There's a tea tomorrow afternoon with the local gentry, your first foray as future mistress. Eleanor's stomach tightened. A tea in her new role under scrutiny. I fear I'll falter. The protocols, the eyes upon me. You won't, Henry said simply, his tone carrying quiet conviction. A brief silence stretched, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. Then, almost hesitantly, he added, "If it eases you, I'll be there. Edward values family presence." She met his gaze then, finding warmth amid the storm-grey depths. A small advance, that look, unspoken support amid the unknown. But she nodded, turning away as Willowbrook came into view, its thatched roof a humble beacon. That night, packing her meagre trunks proved a sombre affair. Mrs. Hargrove folded linens with tear-streaked cheeks, while Clara chattered about visiting the manor's famed conservatory. Reginald paced, muttering of cleared debts and renewed prospects. Eleanor slipped a locket into her gown's pocket, a simple silver piece from her late grandmother, engraved with a single rose. It had been her solace in quiet moments. Now, it felt like an anchor to the girl she was leaving behind. Dawn broke misty and cool. Henry's carriage arrived promptly, loaded with her belongings. Edward had sent word. She was to settle in immediately, the tea serving as her introduction. As they ascended the manor's sweeping drive, footmen in crisp livery unloaded the trunks, their faces impassive masks. The housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, a stout woman of 50 with a starched cap and keys jingling at her waist, greeted Eleanor at the door. "Welcome, miss," she said, curtsying. "His lordship's chambers are prepared adjoining yours. The blue room for your sitting." Eleanor followed her up the grand staircase, the polished banister cool under her palm. The halls stretched endlessly, portraits of stern Blackwood's past staring down. Her chamber overlooked the gardens, manicured lawns sweeping to a ha-ha wall, beyond which the hills rolled wild. She unpacked swiftly, donning a morning gown of soft India muslin, its empire, waist cinched with a ribbon sash. The locket nestled against her skin, a secret talisman. By noon, the house buzzed with preparations. Servants polished silver in the butler's pantry, and the scent of fresh scones wafted from the kitchens. Eleanor ventured to the drawing room, a cavernous space of brocade sofas and a marble mantel where a fire crackled. Edward entered soon after, impeccable in his morning coat, consulting a ledger. "You'll find the staff attentive," he said without preamble, not looking up. "At tea, observe more than speak. The gentry here are particular about newcomers." She curtsied. "I understand, my lord." He nodded curtly, then glanced at her. For a fleeting moment, his expression softened, just a micro-gesture, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "You'll do well. This alliance benefits us both." Before she could respond, guests began arriving. Carriages crunched on the gravel, disgorging ladies in feathered bonnets and gentlemen in tailcoats. The first wave included Mrs. Lydia Hawthorne, a sharp-eyed widow of the village, and her daughter, pert Miss Felicity. Then came Percival Blackwood, slinking in like a shadow, his thin lips curled in perpetual disdain. At 35, he was all angles, hawkish nose, threadbare coat that spoke of faded fortunes. He bowed to Edward with exaggerated deference, but his eyes raked over Eleanor like a challenge. "Charming," Percival drawled as introductions circled. "The future Lady Blackwood, fresh from the cottage wilds. How quaint." Eleanor's cheeks warmed, but she held her chin high. "Mr. Blackwood, your family name suits the manor well." Laughter rippled, light and obligatory. Mrs. Hawthorne steered her to the tea table, laden with china and cucumber sandwiches. "Tell us, dear, how do you find Blackwood? It's a step up from Willowbrook, no?" The question carried barbs, subtle friction of class, the implication of her humble origins. Guests leaned in, fans fluttering. Eleanor poured tea with steady hands, the steam rising like a veil. "The manor is grand, madam, but home is where the heart resides, regardless of stone." A murmur of approval, yet Percival hovered at the edges, whispering to a portly squire. She caught fragments. Debts. Hasty match. Humiliation simmered, subtle but stinging, as eyes darted her way. Henry arrived late, slipping in with apologies, his riding boots still dusted from the stables. He took a seat beside her, his presence a quiet bulwark. As conversation turned to the upcoming hunt ball, Percival pressed, "Miss Hargrove, do you ride, or is that beyond a lady of modest means?" The room hushed. Eleanor's pulse thrummed. Before she could reply, Henry interjected smoothly, "My brother favours a gentle mount for the lady. She's adept, Percival. Don't underestimate Cotswold's stock." Edward, from across the room, merely nodded. Minimal defence, but enough to shift the tide. Percival's smile faltered, retreating to a corner where he watched, eyes narrowed, plotting in shadows. Relief washed over Eleanor. In that shared silence, as Henry passed her a plate of macaroons, their fingers brushed, a small emotional advance, electric yet innocent. His gaze held hers, conveying solidarity without words. The tea wound down, guests departing with polite farewells. But as the last carriage rolled away, a footman approached with a folded gazette from the local press. "For you, a miss from the village correspondent." Eleanor unfolded it, heart sinking. A brief notice. "Hasty betrothal at Blackwood. Lord Edward secures alliance amid family whispers. The bride, from neighbouring obscurity, promises fresh blood, but at what cost to tradition?" Percival's doing, no doubt. The words stung, a visible social consequence rippling outward. Edward scanned it, his jaw tightening. Gossip. It will pass. But as evening fell, Eleanor stood at her window, the locket clutched tight. The brooch, the locket now felt like the symbolic object emerging, its rose engraving glinting in candlelight. It had consoled her through the barbs. Soon it might bind deeper emotions. Henry knocked softly later, entering with a tray of sherry. "To surviving your trial by tea," he said, raising a glass. She smiled faintly, clinking hers against his. "To allies in unexpected places." Outside, the wind howled through the hills. What further tests awaited, and why did Percival's shadow grow longer with each passing hour? The wind howled fiercer that night, rattling the casements of Blackwood Manor like an uninvited guest demanding entry. Eleanor paced her chamber, the locket's chain cool against her collarbone, its weight a reminder of fragile anchors. The sherry from Henry's toast lingered on her tongue, warm and bittersweet, but sleep evaded her. The gazette's barbs replayed in her mind, obscurity, hasty, each word a thorn in the fragile bloom of her new life. A sharp crack of thunder jolted her upright. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, turning the gardens below into a churning sea of mud and bent branches. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the hills in stark white flashes. She crossed to the glass, pressing her palm against the chill pane. The storm had come sudden, a tempest born of the Cotswolds' moody skies, trapping all within the manor's ancient walls. Downstairs, the house stirred. Servants hurried with candles, their footsteps echoing up the stairs. A knock came at her door, Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper, her face flushed in the flickering light. "Miss Hargrove, the gales uprooted a tree across the east drive. No carriages in or out till morning. His lordship bids you join the family in the library for safety." Eleanor nodded, slipping a shawl over her night rail. The corridors felt endless in the storm's roar, shadows dancing like spectres. The library door creaked open to warmth and firelight. Edward stood by the mantel, a poker in hand, stirring the blaze. His dressing gown of deep burgundy wool hung open over his shirt, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the lord, vulnerable almost. Henry lounged in an armchair, a book splayed on his knee, his own attire rumpled from the day's ride. Percival was absent, thankfully, his chamber on the far wing. "Miss Hargrove," Edward said, his voice cutting through the thunder. "The storm may rage till dawn. Best we stay together." She curtsied, settling into a wing chair by the hearth. The fire crackled, casting golden flecks on the spines of leather-bound volumes. Byron, Scott, volumes of poetry that whispered of wild hearts and forbidden seas. Henry closed his book, his eyes meeting hers with that quiet intensity. A night for tales, perhaps. Or silence, if you prefer. The hours stretched. Lightning painted their faces in dramatic strokes, thunder rumbling like distant artillery. Conversation began haltingly. Edward speaking of estate ledgers. The wool yields threatened by the wet. But as the fire dimmed, Henry rose, crossing to a harpsichord in the corner. Its keys gleamed ivory in the low light. "Music calms the soul," he murmured, fingers hovering. "If you'll allow." He played then, a soft melody, haunting and slow, notes weaving through the storm like threads of silver. It was a piece Eleanor recognized from her girlhood lessons, a lament from Handel's suites, full of longing and unresolved chords. Her breath caught. She had not heard it since her grandmother's funeral, years past, when the same tune had played over the old woman's rose-entwined coffin. The locket burned against her skin. Without thinking, she unclasped it, opening the tiny compartment to reveal a faded miniature, her grandmother's portrait, eyes kind and knowing. This song," she said softly, voice barely above the rain. "It was hers. She taught me the keys, before the rheumatics took her hands." Henry's playing faltered, then resumed gentler. He glanced over, curiosity softening his features. "A cherished heirloom, then. Play with me if you wish. Share the burden of the night." Edward watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable, but he did not protest. Eleanor hesitated, then rose, her bare feet silent on the rug. She sat beside Henry on the bench, their shoulders brushing, a confinement forced by the storm, intimate in its necessity. Her fingers trembled on the keys, joining his in a duet. The melody flowed, imperfect but true, bearing layers long hidden. As the last note faded, thunder clapped overhead. "You play with feeling," Henry said, turning to her. His hand covered hers briefly on the keyboard, a gesture of shared solace. Warmth spread from his touch, thawing the chill in her veins. "What burdens you, Eleanor? Beyond the storm?" The use of her name, familiar, unguarded, stirred her. Edward shifted, but remained silent, his duty-bound reserve cracking just enough to let the moment breathe. She withdrew her hand, clutching the locket. "Loss. My grandmother spoke of love as a force unbound by rank or storm, but duty. It chains us." Henry's eyes darkened, storm-blue depths reflecting the fire. "Duty claimed my mother young. She wed Edward's father for alliance, bore us both. But her heart wandered in letters to a lost love abroad. She died, regretting the silence." He paused, voice rough. Guilt lingers, for the life unlived." Edward finally spoke, stepping closer. "And I, widower to a bride of convenience. Childbirth took her, leaving echoes. I seek no repeats of pain, only stability for Blackwood." His admission hung heavy, humanizing the stern lord. For the first time, Eleanor saw not appraisal in his gaze, but a weary understanding. The air thickened with confession, trust weaving invisible bonds. Henry's fingers brushed hers again, lingering, a tacit promise of alliance, changing the room's temperature from formal chill to fragile warmth. No words of passion, only the quiet vow in his touch. You are not alone. Yet as the storm eased to a drizzle, a sharp rap echoed from the hall. A footman entered, dripping, bearing a sealed missive. From Mr. Percival, my lord, delivered by rider despite the gale. Edward broke the wax, scanning the lines. His face hardened. The cousin demands a meeting at first light, claims evidence of irregularities in the betrothal papers, forgery, he alleges. Eleanor's heart plummeted. Percival's shadow encroached, his envoy a serpent in the night, the fragile intimacy shattered, tide ebbing into dread. What poison had he unearthed, and how deep would his sabotage cut before dawn broke? Dawn broke grey and sodden over Blackwood Manor, the storm's fury spent but leaving a landscape scarred. Branches strewn like broken promises across the lawns, the east drive blocked by the fallen oak that now required axes and sweat to clear. Eleanor rose with the household, her eyes shadowed from a night fractured by revelations and that ominous letter. She dressed in a morning gown of dove-grey cambric, its long sleeves and modest ruffle at the neck, a shield against the chill that seeped from the stones. The locket hung heavy at her throat, its rose engraving a faint comfort amid the uncertainty. Down in the breakfast parlour, tension coiled like smoke from the sideboard's chafing dishes. Edward paced before the tall windows, his face a mask of controlled fury, cravat already knotted with precision despite the early hour. Henry sat at the table, buttering toast with deliberate slowness, his jaw set. Percival had arrived at first light as demanded, his horse tethered outside like a harbinger. The footman announced him now, and the cousin entered with a flourish, shaking droplets from his greatcoat, his thin face alight with predatory glee. "Edward, dear cousin," Percival began, his voice oily as he helped himself to eggs without invitation. At 35, he carried the Blackwood features twisted into meanness, narrow eyes, a perpetual smirk beneath a hooked nose, his attire a shabby echo of gentility with frayed cuffs on his coat. "I've ridden through the mud for this. Those papers you signed yesterday. They're a farce. I have proof." Edward stopped pacing, turning with icy calm. "Speak plainly, Percival. Your games end here." The cousin drew a sheaf of documents from his pocket, yellowed and creased, slapping them onto the table. "These are the original entailments from grandfather's will. Blackwood passes intact only to a direct heir, unencumbered by hasty alliances with indebted neighbours." His gaze slid to Eleanor, who stood frozen by the door, a cup of tea forgotten in her hand. "Marrying this cottage girl. It voids the line. I've consulted a solicitor in Cheltenham. Your betrothal is invalid, a sham to dodge my rightful claim." Eleanor's cup clattered to the saucer, tea sloshing over the rim. The words struck like a lash, public, venomous, aimed at her heart. Whispers of obscurity from the Gazette paled against this, her union branded a fraud, her family's salvation crumbling before her eyes. Heat rose in her cheeks, humiliation burning as Percival's eyes raked her anew. Henry surged to his feet, chair scraping back. "Lies! Those entailments are twisted. Father amended them years ago. You're grasping at shadows to steal what's not yours." Percival laughed, a sharp bark. "Shadows! I've letters from witnesses, accounts of your brother's desperation, and witnesses to the bride's indiscretions. Village tongues wag about midnight walks with unsuitable company." His implication hung, vile and pointed, though baseless, yet enough to poison the air. Edward's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. "Enough! This is blackmail, cousin. You'll answer for it in court." But Percival leaned in, voice dropping to a hiss. "Court! By then, the scandal will have spread. I've already sent word to the county assizes and that rag in Oxford. Imagine the headlines. Lord Blackwood's forged union exposed. Your tenants will revolt, creditors circle like vultures, and you, Miss Hargrove, return to your hovel in disgrace, your name mud. The room spun for Eleanor. Isolation crashed in, cut off from her family by the blocked roads, now severed from this fragile new world by Percival's sabotage. Allies fractured. Edward's gaze turned inward, calculating losses. Henry's face twisted with helpless rage. Trust, so tentatively built in the storm's intimacy, splintered under the assault. She was the wound, the weak link in their alliance, her modest origins weaponized against them all. This cannot stand, she whispered, voice breaking, but the damage was done. A tangible blow. Word would race through the village on horseback, amplified by the storm's delay. No return to Willowbrook's innocence. The signing yesterday, that point of no return, now chained her to this maelstrom. Refusal meant exile in shame, persistence, a battle she hadn't chosen. Edward rounded on Percival, voice thunderous. Leave, now! We'll settle this legally. Your claims dismissed, your interference punished. Percival smirked, gathering his papers. As you wish, but the Blackwood name bleeds today. He bowed mockingly to Eleanor. Pity, miss. Back to the shadows with you. As he strode out, the door slamming behind him, silence descended. Edward sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. This upends everything. The betrothal. Suspended until cleared. You must return to Willowbrook, Miss Hargrove, for appearances. Eleanor's heart fractured. Separation. Emotional. Immediate. Henry's eyes met hers across the table, stormy with unspoken fury and regret. He reached as if to speak, but Edward's hand on his shoulder halted him. Not now, brother. The housekeeper appeared, announcing the drive cleared enough for a cart. Eleanor nodded numbly, retreating to pack. In her chamber, tears came hot and silent as she folded the gown from yesterday's tea. The locket felt like a chain now, binding her to a love unspoken, a life unraveling. Henry found her in the hall as trunks were loaded, rain still drizzling. This isn't over, he murmured urgently, his hand brushing hers in farewell. A desperate anchor. Percival will fall. Wait for me. But Edward watched from the doorway, duty reasserting its iron grip. The cart jolted away, manner shrinking in the mist. Eleanor clutched the locket, isolation wrapping tight. What ultimatum awaited at home? Creditors emboldened by scandal, her father's despair, and Henry, pulled back by blood ties. Their fragile bond stretched to breaking. As Willowbrook came into view, a rider approached from the village, bearing news, no doubt, of the spreading fire. Percival's attack had ignited. The war for Blackwood and her heart had only begun. The carriage wheels churned through the mud-slicked lanes, each rut jolting Eleanor like a fresh accusation. Willowbrook Cottage emerged from the mist, its familiar silhouette a bittersweet refuge, yet the air hummed with dread. As the cart halted, her father rushed out, face ashen, a crumpled broadsheet clutched in his fist. Eleanor! The village is aflame with it, Percival's venom. They say the betrophal's a forgery, that we're all frauds. Inside, the parlour felt stifling, the fire unlit against the damp chill. Mrs. Hargrove embraced her, whispering prayers, while Clara hovered, eyes wide with confusion. Reginald paced, his rheumatism forgotten in fury. Creditors at the door already, sniffing blood. If this holds, we're done. Auctioneers tomorrow. Eleanor's hands trembled as she unpacked the locket, its silver case catching the weak light. Amid the folds of her gown spilled a forgotten item. A folded letter slipped into her reticule during the chaos at the manor. Henry's handiwork? She broke the plain seal, heart pounding. The script was Henry's. Bold, urgent. Eleanor, forgive the liberty. Enclosed, a copy from father's old desk. Percival forges claims, but this proves his own deceit. He schemed against our mother years ago, hiding letters that exposed his gambling debts to steal inheritance shares. Edward knows, but duty silences him. Trust blooms in truth. Meet me at the old mill at dusk if you dare. H. Attached was a brittle document, a ledger page from 2 decades past, detailing Percival's embezzlement from the estate's wool funds, witnessed by a long-dead steward. Signatures, dates, all authentic, and tucked within a faded portrait miniature. Their mother young and radiant with a note in her hand, "Percival's lies took my dowry. Protect the boys." Revelation crashed over her like the storm's remnants. Percival wasn't just a grasping cousin. He was a manipulator, weaving debts and forgeries to unravel the Blackwoods from within. Edward's reserve, not coldness, but guilt, guarding family secrets to preserve the name, his own heart scarred by loss and betrayal. Henry's warmth, then, was no flirtation, but a bridge over duty's chasm, born of shared wounds. Peak of hope flickered. She clutched the proofs, resolve hardening. No more passive bride, tossed by gales. Agency surged. She would act, publicly, to reframe the scandal. A letter to the village parson, then the county gazette. Expose Percival's rot, rally the gentry against his greed. By midday, she penned it in the cramped study, quill flying. To the honourable readers, whispers assail the Blackwood betrothal, yet truth pierces the veil. Percival Blackwood, claimant to shadows, hides his own forgeries, ledgers of pilfered fortunes, letters of deceit against his kin. I, Eleanor Hargrove, stand with Lord Edward not in haste, but honour. Let justice illuminate. She sealed it, dispatching a stable boy to the parsonage with a shilling. Word would spread, tea-tables, assemblies, altering perceptions from victim to avenger. But Valley loomed. Percival's response, swift and vicious. Dusk fell early, the Cotswolds cloaked in twilight haze. Eleanor slipped from the cottage, shawl drawn tight over her woolen gown, the locket a talisman against her breast. The old mill crouched by the brook, its wheels silent, vines choking the stones. Henry's horse was tethered nearby. He emerged from the gloom, greatcoat blending with the dusk. "You came," he breathed, stepping close. No embrace, just a gaze that bridged the miles between duty and desire, trust deepening, passion veiled in restraint. "I read it all," she said, pressing the ledger into his hands. "Your mother's portrait, the debts. Percival's the spider, not us." Henry's fingers brushed hers as he took it, lingering in silent vow. "Edward buried this to shield us. Father's will favoured him as heir. Percival's rage festered. My travels, escaping the web. But you've ignited the light." Their shoulders nearly touched in the mill's shadow, the brook murmuring secrets. He spoke of Edward's hidden grief, the widower's nights poring over ledgers, guilt for not saving their mother from Percival's early schemes. "He's not stone, Eleanor. Duty armoured him, but your letter, it cracks the shell." Hope swelled. A reapproximation, his hand steadying hers on the cold stone wall. "We'll face him together," Henry whispered, eyes locking with hers in contained fire. But danger crested. Hooves thundered from the lane, a rider, cloaked and urgent, Percival's man no doubt spying. The intruder wheeled away, vanishing into the mist. Henry's jaw tightened. "He's roused. My letter to the assizes will counter, but he'll strike harder, perhaps at your family or the manor itself." Eleanor's pulse raced, each advance met by greater threat. Indignation boiled against Percival, the thief of legacies, poisoner of bonds. How dare he wield lies like a blade? As stars pricked the sky, Henry mounted. "Edward summons a public assembly at the village hall, 3 days hence, to confront the claims head-on. Will you stand with us?" She nodded, the hook sinking deep. The decisive forum awaited. where truths would clash like swords. But in the gathering dark, Percival's shadow lengthened. What final sabotage brewed? The village hall in the heart of the Cotswolds stood resolute under a canopy of autumn leaves, its timber beams groaning softly as 300 souls crammed inside for the assembly. Torches flickered along the walls, casting wavering shadows on faces flushed with anticipation and ale. It was the eve of the Harvest Fair, 1812's chill nipping at the air, but tonight's gathering pulsed with more than merriment. Whispers of scandal had drawn the gentry from miles around, squires in embroidered waistcoats, ladies in silk pelisses rustling like secrets. The Blackwood betrothal hung in the balance, Percival's accusations a storm cloud over the wool-rich valleys. Eleanor arrived on Edward's arm, her heart hammering like the distant church bells. She wore a gown of ivory satin, its high waist draped in soft folds, sleeves puffed just so, a pearl brooch at her throat, the locket tucked safely beneath. At 20, she felt every eye upon her, from the parson's wife to the blacksmith's kin. Humiliation from the Gazette's barbs lingered, but resolve steeled her spine. Henry walked behind, his presence a silent shield, eyes locking with hers in the crush, a glance heavy with unspoken alliance. Edward led them to the raised dais at the hall's end, where a long table bore decanters and platters of cold meats. Percival awaited, smug in a coat too tight across his paunch, flanked by 2 burly witnesses, a Cheltenham solicitor with a pinched face and a village gossipmonger known for loose lips. The cousin's dossier lay open before him, yellowed papers, forged seals glinting mockingly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed as the murmur died, "tonight we unmask deceit, Lord Edward's union with this upstart is a forgery, a desperate ploy to thwart my rightful claim." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Hawthorne fanned herself vigorously, eyes darting to Eleanor. Percival thrust forward a letter, its ink fresh and damning. "Witness this, a confession from the notary who signed the betrothal. Bribed, he admits, to overlook irregularities, and affidavits from tenants claiming the Hargroves coerced the match with false debts." His bought witness, the solicitor, nodded eagerly, while the gossipmonger bleated agreement, painting Eleanor as a schemer who ensnared the lord with cottage wiles. The hall erupted. Fingers pointed, voices rose in a cacophony, indignation at the betrayal, pity laced with scorn for the poor deluded lord. Eleanor's cheeks burned, the weight of scrutiny crushing. Edward's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on hers, a rare public gesture of solidarity. But Percival pressed, waving a final card, a crumpled note, purportedly from her father, admitting fabricated ledgers to lure the alliance. "See, the web unravels, Blackwood falls to me." Chaos teetered on the edge. Squires muttered of contested rents, ladies whispered of ruined seasons. Eleanor's knees weakened, the moral crux sharpening, yield to shame or defy with truth. She stepped forward, voice clear despite the tremor. "Enough lies. Percival Blackwood spins deceit like a weaver's loom, but threads fray under light." Silence fell, brittle as frost. She drew the ledger from her reticule, the one Henry had entrusted, holding it high. "This proves his perfidy. 20 years past, he embezzled estate funds, hid his mother's dowry to fund gambling dens in Oxford. Witnesses? The late steward's son sits here tonight." She nodded to a sturdy farmer in the front row, who rose, cap in hand, recounting the tale with gravelly certainty. Dates, sums, Percival's frantic bribes to silence tongues. Henry surged beside her, adding the portrait miniature, their mother's face a poignant spectre. She warned of his greed in letters he burned. Edward shielded the family name from scandal, but no more. This betrothal honors duty and truth, not forgery. Edward spoke then, voice resonant, stripping away his reserve. Percival's claims crumble. "I've summoned the county magistrate. His forgeries will see him exiled to debtor's prison by week's end. Proofs circulated, the real entailment, affidavits from loyal tenants debunking the false letter. The solicitor blanched, stammering retreat. The gossip-monger slunk away, exposed as a paid pawn. The tide turned swift. Murmurs shifted to outrage at Percival, the spider in their midst. Mrs. Hawthorne clapped, then the hall thundered with applause. Squires toasted the brave lady. Ladies pressed forward with nods of respect. Percival's face drained to ashen, his dossier snatched and torn by indignant hands. He backed away, stumbling over a bench, humiliation etching deep as he fled into the night, jeers chasing him like hounds. Euphoria crested, a wave crashing through Eleanor. From shadowed bride to village champion, her choice defined her, moral steel forging respect from the ashes. Edward's eyes met hers, gratitude softening the Lord's mask. Henry stood close, his hand brushing her arm in the crush. A tacit vow, intimate in its restraint, promising depths beyond the storm. As the assembly dissolved into reels and laughter, the hall emptied under starlit skies. Silence settled at last, the tempest broken. Outside, by the hall's lantern glow, Henry drew her aside. No words needed. His gaze said it all, commitment sealed, hearts aligned in quiet fire. But in the distance a lone rider vanished into the hills. Percival rooted, yet whispers lingered. What final reckoning awaited under the manor's eaves? If this triumph has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another thrilling tale from the channel. The carriage ride back to Blackwood Manor wound through the Cotswolds' starlit lanes, the air crisp with the scent of turned earth and fading harvest. Eleanor sat beside Edward, the ivory satin of her gown whispering against the cushions, while Henry rode ahead on horseback, his silhouette a dark sentinel against the moonlit hills. The assembly's echoes lingered, applause, jeers for Percival, the sweet rush of vindication. Yet a quiet resolve settled over her, the weight of proofs now lifted, replaced by the promise of mending. Edward broke the silence first, his voice softer than the night's hush. "You were magnificent tonight, Eleanor. Your courage. It saved more than the betrothal. It saved us." She turned to him, meeting those blue eyes that now held warmth, not just duty. "We saved each other, my lord. The Blackwood name endures because truth prevailed." The manor gates creaked open, lanterns flickering welcome. Inside the great hall, the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, awaited with a tray of mulled wine, her stern face cracked by a rare smile. "The village sings your praises, miss. Word spreads like wildfire. No more shadows on this house." Upstairs in the library, where the storm had once confined them, Edward summoned his solicitor by urgent note. The man arrived before dawn, bleary-eyed but efficient, poring over the ledgers and letters Eleanor had brandished. By morning's light, filtering through frost-laced windows, the verdict came swift. Percival's forgeries unravelled under scrutiny, his embezzled funds traced to hidden accounts in Bath, witnesses recanting under oath. "Exile is the least," the solicitor declared, quill scratching final decrees. "Debtor's prison awaits if he returns. His claims dissolved, rights stripped. The entailment holds firm for you, Lord Edward." Percival's fate sealed in ink. Banished to the continent on a meagre stipend, his name struck from family rolls, prestige crumbled like the dry leaves outside. No trial needed, the gentry's outrage sufficed, letters of condemnation flooding the manor by noon. The cousin who had schemed in shadows now slunk away, a pariah whispered of in alehouses, his threats reduced to dust. With the legal noose tightened, the family threads wove anew. Edward called a private council in the drawing-room, fire roaring against the chill. Mrs. Hargrove and Clara arrived by cart, faces alight with relief, while Reginald followed, his rheumatism eased by cleared debts. "The mortgages lift," he announced, embracing Eleanor. Your stand mended it all. Allies found reward. Mrs. Hawthorne, once barbed, sent a basket of hothouse blooms with a note of apology. Her daughter Felicity invited to the manor's Yuletide ball as gesture of amity. The parson, mentor in quiet faith, received a living stipend, his sermons now praising Eleanor's fortitude. Neutrals shifted. The squire who had doubted pledged wool contracts, repositioning loyalty to the strengthened house. Even Percival's bought solicitor. Redeemed by confession, earned a clerk's post in Cheltenham, his neutrality bought back by truth. Transformation bloomed in the protagonists. Edward, once armoured in reserve, now led with compassion, his voice deep and steady, directing servants to aid storm-damaged tenants. No Blackwood prospers alone, he said at luncheon, eyes on Eleanor with newfound equality. She, in turn, spoke with leadership's grace, suggesting a village school from the manor's unused wing. Knowledge binds us stronger than blood, she proposed, her words carrying the weight of one who had faced the abyss. Henry watched her, pride etching his features, his own growth evident in restraint, turned to purpose. No longer the wandering brother, he committed to the estate, overseeing repairs with hands calloused from honest labour. You've shown us the way, he murmured to her later, in the conservatory where orchids unfurled like secrets, the bond sealed not by force, but choice. That evening, as twilight painted the hills violet, Edward led them to the rose garden, renewed after the gales. Pruners had cleared the wilted, planting fresh blooms without old thorns. He drew a simple gold band from his pocket, unadorned, forged anew in the village smithy. No heirlooms tainted by Percival's greed. "Eleanor Hargrove," he said, kneeling on the dew-kissed gravel, "will you wed me as partner, not pawn, for Blackwood, for us?" Tears pricked her eyes. This was alliance of equals. Duty evolved to respect. Her voice in decisions, her heart's spark, acknowledged. "Yes, Edward, with all my soul." Henry stepped forward, clasping her hand after the ring slipped on, his touch lingering in silent benediction. The three stood together, a trinity forged in trial. Edward's steady leadership, Henry's vital fire, Eleanor's compassionate bridge. Legacy took root swiftly. The school rose from sketches to stone, funded by estate yields, its first-class blending village children with Clara's eager lessons. Eleanor oversaw the library's expansion, shelves groaning with volumes on history and poetry, open to all. A beacon against ignorance's shadows. The new equilibrium hummed. Dinners lively with debate, strolls through hills where laughter echoed, the manor's halls alive with purpose. As winter's first snow dusted the eaves, they gathered in the blue room, firelight dancing. Edward raised a glass. To horizons unbound. Outside, the Cotswolds stretched endless, a future horizon gleaming. Eleanor leaned into Henry's shoulder briefly, Edward's nod approving the quiet intimacy. Love's forms varied, passionate glance, steadfast vow, but all wove unbreakable. Yet in the post's morning delivery came a soft hook, a letter from distant kin, hinting at Percival's desperate schemes abroad. Would echoes stir again? For now, peace reigned, hearts aligned under one roof. In the garden's hush, Henry drew her close for a stolen moment, lips brushing hers in a kiss born of pure affection. No shadows, only light. The world awaited their legacy, blooming eternal. 5 years had woven their gentle tapestry over the Cotswolds, softening the edges of old scars while deepening the roots of new beginnings. Blackwood Manor stood prouder now, its ivy-clad stones warmed by the sun of 1817, the gardens a riot of roses that bloomed without the threat of winter's bite. Eleanor Blackwood, once the reluctant bride from Willowbrook Cottage, moved through the sun-dappled halls with the quiet authority of a woman who had claimed her place not by chance, but by unyielding grace. At 25, her chestnut curls were pinned in a simple yet elegant style, framing a face touched by maturity. Lines of laughter at her eyes, a poise born of trials endured and triumphs savoured. She paused at the nursery window, watching her children chase butterflies across the lawn. Little Reginald, 3 years old and sturdy as his namesake grandfather, toddled after his sister Amelia, who at 4 commanded the garden with the imperious wave of a tiny hand. Edward's heirs, they carried the Blackwood blue in their eyes, but Eleanor's warmth in their smiles. The marriage to Edward had blossomed beyond duty's rigid frame. What began as alliance had flowered into a partnership of deep respect, their evenings filled with shared ledgers and quiet debates by the fire. He had softened, his stern lines easing into affection, his hand often seeking hers in the hush of night. Yet love, in its truest form, had revealed itself multifaceted, a bond that embraced the brothers without fracture. Henry lingered nearby, as he always did these days, leaning against the conservatory door with a sketchbook in hand. No longer the restless traveller, he had returned from a brief sojourn in Italy 2 years past. His heart tethered firmly to the manor. At 30, he cut a figure both familiar and transformed. His dark hair longer, touched with the sun's gold, his frame lean from overseeing the estate's expansions. He sketched the children now, his pencil capturing Amelia's gleeful dash, but his gaze drifted to Eleanor, holding a tenderness that time had only burnished. The love that had sparked in stolen glances amid storms and scandals had endured, not as betrayal, but as a quiet harmony woven into the family's fabric. Edward had known since that first kiss in the garden, a moment he had witnessed from the shadows and chosen to embrace rather than condemn. "We are bound by more than vows," he had said one autumn eve, his voice steady as he clasped both their hands. "Blackwood thrives on unity, not division." No whispers of impropriety tainted their circle. Society saw only the devoted Lady Blackwood and her brother-in-law, the manor's steadfast steward, their closeness a pillar of the household's strength. Percival's shadow had faded to a mere footnote in village lore. Banished to a dingy lodging in Calais, he had squandered his stipend on cards and grudges, dying 2 winters ago of fever and regret. Unmourned, save by the creditors, he evaded in vain. His schemes had cost him everything: prestige, kin, legacy, while the Blackwoods rose. The entailment secured, debts dissolved, Willowbrook Cottage restored as a dower house for Eleanor's parents. Reginald Hargrove, now spry at 57, tended bees in retirement, his rheumatism a distant ache. Beatrice, healthier in the manor's shadow, doted on her grandchildren, her lace handkerchiefs traded for knitting needles. Clara, blooming at 20, had made a match of her own to a kind Oxford scholar. Her season in Bath a fond memory that echoed Eleanor's sacrifices. The village school, Eleanor's legacy, thrived under the old oak where secrets once hid. Children from shepherds' huts and squires' halls gathered daily, learning letters and lore, their laughter a balm against the era's rigid divides. Eleanor taught there weekly, her voice carrying tales of resilience, inspiring girls to dream beyond bonnets and betrothals. The library expanded too, its shelves groaning with volumes donated from Henry's travels. Byron's verses, Scott's adventures, open to all who sought light in words. Yet nostalgia tugged at quieter moments. Eleanor slipped the locket from her drawer, its rose engraving polished bright, the miniature within now joined by tiny curls from her children. It had consoled through tempests, bound confessions in the storm, and now symbolized the life rebuilt. She met Henry in the rose garden that afternoon, the same gravel path where vows had renewed. He set aside his sketch, drawing her into an embrace that spoke volumes, warm, unhurried, a love that had weathered years without fading. 5 years, he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. And still, you are my horizon. She smiled, tracing the line of his jaw. Ours, Henry. Edward's too. We've paid no price too high, only gained what endures. Edward joined them soon after, ledger in hand, but eyes soft. He pressed a kiss to Eleanor's temple, then clasped Henry's shoulder, a ritual of their unconventional triad, sealed in trust. The children raced up, tugging at skirts and coats, pulling them into a game of tag amid the blooms. Laughter rang out, pure and unbound, as the Cotswolds' sun dipped low, painting the hills in gold. In the manor's heart, love had not just survived, it had multiplied, a legacy of compassion and choice that whispered to the winds. Some bonds defy convention, enduring eternal. As twilight fell, Eleanor glanced back at the nursery window, heart full. The girl from Willowbrook had found her place, not in cage or crown, but in the warmth of those she cherished most. As the sun dipped below the Cotswolds hills, casting long shadows over Blackwood Manor's blooming gardens, Eleanor lingered in the rose arbour with her family. The air carried the sweet tang of late summer blooms, a fragrance that mingled with the laughter of Reginald and Amelia chasing fireflies in the twilight. 5 years had transformed not just the estate, but the very essence of those who called it home. Edward stood nearby, his arm draped casually over the stone bench, watching the children with a father's quiet pride. Henry, ever the bridge between them, knelt to scoop up Amelia, her giggles echoing like a melody from their shared past. This life they had built was no accident of fate, but a testament to the unyielding power of choice. Eleanor remembered the girl she had been, standing at the edge of Willowbrook's overgrown garden, heart heavy with the chains of duty. She had agreed to marry the Lord for survival, stepping into a world of rigid expectations and hidden shadows. Yet what she had not anticipated was the depth of connection that would bloom, not just with Edward's steady resolve, but with Henry's vibrant spirit. Their love had evolved into something profound, a triad of trust and affection that defied the era's narrow conventions. It taught her that true bonds are forged in vulnerability, not in the cold forge of obligation. The lessons from those turbulent days lingered like the manor's enduring oaks. First, courage in the face of scandal could rewrite destinies. Percival's malice had sought to shatter them, but by unveiling his deceptions, Eleanor had turned whispers into roars of support. It showed that silence breeds shadows, while truth illuminates paths forward. Second, love wears many faces. Edward's was the rock of partnership, Henry's the flame of passion, and together they created a harmony stronger than any solitary vow. In a time when marriages were often transactions of land and lineage, theirs proved that equality and empathy could elevate even the most arranged union to something sacred. And finally, legacy is not inherited, it is cultivated. The school that now echoed with eager voices, the library shelves heavy with stories of resilience, these were the fruits of their trials. They reminded everyone that one person's stand could ripple through a community, lifting the humble alongside the highborn. Eleanor's journey from reluctant bride to compassionate leader inspired the village women who gathered at her teas, sharing their own quiet rebellions against societal cages. As the stars began to prick the velvet sky, Edward drew Eleanor close, his voice a low rumble. "We've come far, my love, from storms to this serenity." Henry joined them, his hand finding hers in the dim light, a silent affirmation of their unbreakable circle. The children, tiring at last, nestled against their parents, the family's warmth a shield against the cooling night. If this tale of unexpected love and triumphant hearts has stirred something within you, take a moment to reflect on your own choices. What duty have you transformed into destiny? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Eleanor's journey, and how did it resonate with your life? To show you've journeyed to the end with us, write the word rose in your comment. It'll be our secret signal that you're a true fan, helping spread this story to others who need its inspiration. For more Regency romances filled with passion, intrigue, and heartfelt victories, check out the cards I've pinned below. Hit play on another adventure, and remember, in every shadow lies the potential for light. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Until the next tale unfolds.